Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and you are listening to Spell It Out, Magic, Reflections, and Shadows. Today's topic is going to be about the Supernal Triangle and how to use it to form effective thought. But first, Michael has a few announcements.
Hey, everybody. A couple things. First of all, we just have a really great month coming up, so I'm really excited about the shows that we have. We have Humberto Braga coming next week, and he has started a new website, Guide True, and it's a place of networking mediums and healers and psychics and all kinds of really cool people. So he's going to talk about his project, and you know, he's always a great guy in terms of just, you know, super intelligent. So gosh knows where the conversation will go, but it's always a ton of fun. So we're looking forward to that. Our friend Eric Bennett will be here the week after talking about prophecy and revelation and how biblical prophecy applies to what we're going through these days and what it tells us about where we're headed as a planet and a species. So I think you guys are going to really enjoy that. Our good friend Reverend Jim McGrath is back the following week to talk about St. Patrick, since it's St. Patrick's Day. So we get the real down low on who St. Patrick really was and what he was all about. And I suspect it has to do a lot more than drinking beer, so we'll find out from Jim. He's always a great source of information. And then James Him Mitchell rounds out our guest this coming month, and he's going to be talking about dream interpretation, which is something, Krista's kept dream journals, and I think a lot of us are very interested in dream interpretation. So again, a wonderful show. Get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, it's all spelled out. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Please subscribe and like our show and comment. And we just really love having you guys, and we hope that we're doing a good job of entertaining you. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to Krista for her talk on the Supernal Triangle. Take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. So my first show, Spell It Out show, was about know yourself. And an aspect of knowing yourself is working with the mind. It is a very obviously important and essential part of being human and also of working to improve things. But what exactly constitutes thought? That's what I was thinking about. And as you know, many different kinds of people, from Edgar Cayce to Napoleon Hill, they talk so much about the importance of thought. In fact, I have a little book called Mind as Builder by Edgar Cayce. And at first, when I was reading these books, I would just assume I understood what they meant by thought. But then when I would look at my own mind and my own thoughts, I realized there were different kinds of thinking, and some that really didn't amount to anything. You know, they call it the monkey mind if you want. And then there were thoughts that had power and oomph in them, and that actually not only would produce a result, but I would want to focus on more and more, and I could kind of build on it. So being that I love the Qabalah and I love meditating on the Tree of Life, which is a diagram that you can find online. It's a beautiful diagram, and we follow the correspondences that are connected to Aleister Crowley's view, which is very close to the Golden Dawn view. There is the top of the tree forms a triangle, and it's traditionally called the Supernal Triangle. And so you don't ever be like, you know, I guess overwhelmed by the terms in Qabalah, because we didn't know any of the terms. We just worked with the imagery, and we still got what we needed from it. So I've kind of learned it over the years, some of the terms. And of course, it's important, but I don't think it's essential to understanding it. So supernal, for instance, just means, the word means heavenly, celestial, or divine. But also the top of the tree, as we've mentioned in a previous show, is more conceptual by nature. And the Supernal Triangle is basically a triangle that's made up of the aces at the top. You have the 2 on the right-hand path, all the 2s, all the aces, all the 3s on the left. And then you have connecting them, the trumps, you have the Fool connecting the ace to the twos, you have the Magician connecting the ace to the threes, and then you have the Empress, which is horizontal, connecting the 2 and the 3. And then you have the High Priestess kind of bisecting the Empress, so it's perpendicular, going down from the ace through all the way down to the 6. So that's the main ones. There's Doth, but I'm not going to talk about the invisible Sephira because it's a little complicated. We're going to talk about the basics. There's also another layer of complication, or complexity, I should say, not complication. It seems complicated, where you lay out then the knights or kings, depending on what deck you use, in the 2s. And you also lay out all of the suit of wands in the 2s. And then you also lay out the queens in the 3s and all the suit of cups. But you don't really need to do that in the beginning. You can simply work with the numbered cards and the trumps to understand basically what seems like a circuitry to me. And so I'm going to break it down, but I don't think it operates logically like this. I think the brain is much more dynamic and flexible. So for me, having thought about from the Kabbalistic point of view, what constitutes a thought, it includes this top, all of the energies and the consciousness of the Supernal Triangle. And it makes a lot of sense, actually. So you have the aces, which are, in a sense, the aces are very elemental. They're like, Ace of Wands is like a spark of inspiration. And then I don't think I'm going to go through necessarily each of the suits, how they form things, but just the idea the ace is sort of the spark, and the 2 starts to look at options, and the 3s actually start to maybe look at some of the ways that things can manifest, or also some of the concerns of it. And then we're going to add in sort of the trumps. So I'd like to start with the trumps because they're a little easy to formulate in my own mind and sort of to tell you how I feel about the way they operate and the way they create thought. So we have the Fool connected to the ace, and the Fool is original. It's very curious. It's actually electrical. It's connected to the planet Uranus, and very unpredictable. So to me, that is an element of thought. The original thought has that in it, an original thought of some kind, original to you. And we have the Magician, which is opposite from the Fool, which is going to take what is original and work with it and rework with it and transform it with its abilities. And then we have the Empress, to me, is the place where everything initially kind of forms, almost like if I was cooking. And I'm going to put all of my ingredients into the pot to create something. So the Empress is certainly a huge part of creating any of our desires in life. And it seems to operate in a very organic fashion. The Empress is associated with the planet Venus, and the planet Venus actually has a couple of placements in the Qabalah. But it's, to me, the ideal sort of aesthetic Venus, and has that sense of purity associated with it. So there's nothing really, even though some Kabbalistic people think that once you get into the 3s, the energy is already getting corrupt a little bit. I don't really go by that. I think that the whole top of the tree is quite pure. And in fact, I love this quote from Deanne Fortune's book, The Mystical Qabalah, which is a beautiful, brilliant book on the Qabalah. It's like the Book of Thoth. You can keep reading it over and over, and you get new insights from it. She says, in the first triangle, we find a representation of the creative forces of the substance of the universe. And remember, the Qabalah is both a reflection of the creation outside and our souls. So it's both within and without. So to me, that's where, when we have all of the ingredients, we have the origination, the curiosity, the inventiveness of the Fool. We have desire nature. So that's where you might find there's a little of that sense of emotion around the thought itself. For instance, sometimes I'll be thinking about something I want to do, and it actually feels good. It feels like a sense of well-being comes into me. And I know that is a productive line of thinking for me, for my soul, that is what I'm going to be doing. And that's why I don't think you can just, say affirmations by route and they're effective, because what if it's not the right affirmation for your soul at the moment? What isn't really, what you can't really wrap your mind around it. You just think you should say this. And if it's having no effect, it's not really the right beginning to a thought. Now, you can look at sort of the nuances of, well, what about the 2s and the 3s? And, well, the 2s, let's say I'm working on a thought, and maybe it is a thought that I can go in a couple directions. And so the 2s like to keep their options open in life. They will kind of look at different possibilities. Now, on a very subtle level, these possibilities might not be well formed, but your mind might be looking at sort of ways in which this thought can sort of operate. And then the 3s take it sort of to the next step in a sense. And sometimes I do see that the 3s have a lot of questions. And a part of evolution in life is being willing to ask questions, whatever they are. And again, think of it as a more subtle process, not like, okay, now I'm going to ask my question about this word. Certainly, you could do that with certain kinds of thoughts if maybe I'm working on a project of some kind. But what's interesting is once you start thinking that thoughts have a lot more to them, you will notice there are some thoughts like I can think something really awful and it just goes through my mind. And as long as I'm not really sort of fastening things to it, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't count as anything. So don't worry if you have a bad thought here and there that you want to strangle your neighbor upstairs because they are playing disco music at 3 a.m. It's not really a thought. A thought has to be something more, has more ingredients in it. And it has to have all these combinations to actually begin to want to materialize. Now, what I was thinking about, now this is again really my own view about the High Priestess, and this is from doing a lot of readings. So the High Priestess is an important aspect of the thought process. She is when you look at her visually, she's very clear, and there's, usually she's sort of colored in sort of blues, kind of that cool energy. So there's a neutrality about the High Priestess and objectivity. And some people associate the High Priestess with intuition, which I think is correct. But it means that our concept of intuition is probably a little off for most of us, because the High Priestess, being part of the middle pillar, really combines both the left and right in ways that are really unusual. So she will sort of combine your experiences, your thoughts, your dreams. She's also objective, so any kind of research you do. And over years, of course, this is going to create this intuitive ability to assess things quickly. But in the Qabalah, and this is a little bit more of the traditional view of the Qabalah, is she dips down into first through the 6s and then to 9s and 10s. And so she's part of that whole stream. But the 9s are what kind of are very interesting to me. So some people see this as a treasury of memories where you can pull all kinds of memories and images from the subconscious world. And it's the astral plane, it's all of that. And at first I sort of did not really think that was true until it started happening in some of my readings, where I would notice when people picked 9s, they could sometimes have these spontaneous memory experiences that would come through. In fact, I had that happen once when I was contacted by someone from my past, and I picked a couple cards on them. And I remember one was the 9 of coins, and I did have this kind of little splash of memories kind of come through that needed a little healing work. And then once I kind of knew what it was, it resided. And I was really kind of surprised because I'd not thought about this person for years. And so I said, oh, that's interesting. So for me, there is that element. The High Priestess, even though she's connected to the beginning, the aces, she can pull up the tree as well these memories and experiences that you have that can be part of thought and the thought process. Michael, you had something to say.
I think a big part of that too, I think, is especially with the 9s, that concept of realization, which is really such a big part of it. It's all about seeing everything, seeing the truth, and it's that full sense of realization, which I think you're talking about. And then just to come back quickly to a comment I wanted to make on the Fool and the Magician. Again, different kinds of elements of thought. The Fool being that, sorry, my voice is going today. The Fool being that and just imaginative, creative kind of a thought, curiosity, as you said, imagination. Whereas the magician being more of the analytical memory type of thought. And again, we have those two basic thoughts. We have that purely creative thought, and we have memory. And I think that the priestess, again, sort of being the combination of those two things is what I always see, or a blend of it. But to me, again, that center pillar, it's always just that analytical, objective, realization, truth kind of energy. It just is what it is.
It's really true. I totally agree with what you're saying. I like how you said the part about the nines especially. So, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is that as an exercise, if you're interested in learning how to work with the tree, I would simply tell you to lay the cards out and look at them, because even I do that now after many, many years. Like, I still like doing that because there's something about the tangible visual cards themselves. And for this exercise, I would insist that you use a Kabbalistic deck. And the reason being that the Waite deck and Crowley's deck, they have corresponded colors that are traditionally associated with each of the Sephiroth. And so they're there to represent through color, especially the color part, which is really very sophisticated, the different shades that are associated with the colors. And that you do that because it's part of learning to tap into more of the imagery of the tree. So at least if you're doing a Kabbalistic or Paul Foster Case's deck, you color your own deck with that. So he's also really into the Qabalah, and they all use this color system. There's also, on top of it, I forgot to mention, there's planets associated with each of the different Sephiroth. So there's, I think, I'm not sure about the ace. I've seen Neptune, and I've seen another one being representing the aces. So I'm not sure about that one, but I would say I know for sure that the threes are Saturn, and I think the twos are the whole zodiac is what it is. So you can kind of look at it from that point of view too. And remember, the thing about even thinking about thinking is that you think about it. So the more I've thought about the Supernal Triangle, I really think I'm kind of onto something for myself, that I really like this idea of how can I form an effective thought. And then we'll at maybe some point talk about watching the thought as it comes down the tree into the world. And I'll talk about that on another show. I also thought it would be a good time to do it since Mercury just went retrograde very recently. Let's see, the exact date for you was Sunday, February 16th at 4:54 Pacific time. And this is PM Pacific time. And it was at that point in 12 degrees of Pisces. And it's going to stay retrograde until March 9th, which is a Monday, 8:49 p.m. But by then it's going to have backed into Aquarius, 28 degrees Aquarius. Did you have a question, Michael?
Yeah, can you please talk briefly to the people who completely lose their mind every time Mercury goes retrograde? And it's something that I think that we've so overblown. And my personal opinion anyway, it's almost like they think the world should stop for 3 weeks every month when it goes retrograde, or every other month. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I want to talk about Mercury retrograde. First of all, there are plenty of very well-known astrologers. I've listened to Western and Vedic. They all say it's nonsense. It is complete ridiculous craziness that people go nuts over Mercury retrograde. Now, I did like something that Rick Levine said, that basically it just means Mercury's energy is a little strong. It's stronger because it's literally closer to the Earth. But he was traveling, and he said, look, just if you're concerned about contracts, just read them more thoroughly. And isn't that always a good idea? So most astrologers, they will say what matters is if you were born with Mercury retrograde, but that means something different. That's part of your psyche. So it's not what people think. But I did come across a brilliant book by Aaron Sullivan, which I've talked about before, which talks about retrograde planets and how can I use a retrograde to really evolve. And she has a really interesting, thought out view of Mercury retrograde being a process. And so Mercury itself, the planet, is about communication, but it's also about how we think. And so, sure, if I think every time Mercury goes retrograde that I'm going to be crazy and I put some energy in it, guess what? I will be crazy. But that's you. That's not Mercury retrograde doing it to you. So, but I do like what she has to say. If you want to just use the energy, because it is a different, they do say it's a different energy. They just don't say it matters as much, people. And it doesn't mean you have to stop everything, because you would never have a job if you couldn't sign a contract or if you couldn't travel. Think about that. And that's not even talking about the pre-Mercury and the storm part. So you would always be dealing with Mercury retrograde. And remember, people, Mercury is a trickster. It's laughing at you when you're doing that. It's saying, I got you. That's what I think. So I hope that that helps with what Michael was asking. But please, people, don't blame Mercury. It's a great little planet, and it's been through a lot if you look at the real planet. It's a tough little planet. So, but what I like about her thoughts, Erin Sullivan, she says that, first of all, it's very important you actually know where Mercury retrograde is transiting in your chart. What house it's in means that's the arena where you can deepen something. And she likes to say that, or she suggests that each of the different, when Mercury's in a different element. So this time we're going to be moving into the air elements. We're still partially in water because it's Pisces, but it's moving into Aquarius. She says one thing you can do as a meditation is ask specific questions that go to the element. So if you listen to one of my cosmic weather, we talked about how she said water, the question is, what is the quality of my life in that house or houses, if it's going through a couple houses, where Mercury is retrograding in that particular water sign. So in this case, it would be Pisces. You'd look for, okay, what house is it in? In my case, it's going to be going through my 12th house. And so I would look at kind of a hard thing to look at, because the 12th house is the dissolving of the self. So I don't know how I'm going to ask that question, because it's just going to dissolve, I think. But she's right. And then so with the air sign, what's different is she says a good question to start out with is, what is the meaning of the relationships in my life? And she does also say that air is not going to be quite as emotionally I guess, oriented as the water would be, according to her. So this way you can look at Mercury retrograde as just another way to know yourself and to really understand yourself. And because this is a slower thing, so for instance, that way you would look at, I think it takes almost 2 years to get completely out of whatever the element sign it is. So for instance, last year it was primarily in the water signs, and this year it's partially in the water signs. So it's actually a 2-year process where you're working with an aspect of your chart and you're trying to understand it. And this is a much more useful way to use Mercury retrograde. And another thing she says, in fact, this is a quote about just using Mercury retrograde as a cycle is really beautiful that Erin Sullivan writes. She says, quote, "The use of this cycle alerts us to the unconscious rhythms of reflection and attunes us to our inner clock by dint of knowing where concentration and introspection are most needed." So without knowing your chart, I'm not saying you can't use Mercury retrograde in general as sort of maybe you want to sort of understand what it feels like in the sign of Aquarius, which is kind of a cool, I think, sign to be in, Aquarius being all about truth and the rebel. And that would be some interesting dynamics, I think, because we're all going through that energy, but not knowing where to put it, not knowing what arena it's best served, to me makes it less personal. If you want to really make this very personal planet personal, you must know your natal chart and where it's going, or it's not really as effective. And then you might just want to contemplate in general what you think that means, Mercury in Aquarius. But it will be first in Pisces, and you can go back to last year when it was also in Pisces, because there might be some sort of issue in your life that you're still sort of thinking about that is still kind of coming up a little bit, but it's going to switch March 4th into Aquarius. So you might notice just a little difference in your thought process. Now, what I really like about Mercury being in Aquarius in general is Aquarius is associated with the sign of the genius. And Mercury being quick and witty, I do think this is a good time to practice thinking and to go in. So starting March 4th, and it will be, I forget how long Mercury will be in Aquarius, it'll be beyond the time that it's retrograde. You can say this is a good time to think in general about unusual ideas and practice the Supernal Triangle visualization and look about how I think. And it's fun, actually. It's almost like a game, or realizing that there's more to thought than just allowing words and images to go through our minds, but not in a controlling way. Many of us know that magic works best when we let go. And we'll talk about the importance of letting go once we have certain thoughts formulated, and perhaps when to speak and when not to speak. Though generally I find speaking my hopes out loud is very powerful, even if it's just to myself. So it's a great time to be thinking about thought, and thought does really create us. What I think about on a constant basis, what I fill my mind with on a constant basis, is going to form me. Now, if you're like me, I have a moon in Gemini. I need a certain kind of stimulation, and I have a curiosity about many topics and subjects. But not everybody has that kind of mind. I think we do have different kinds of minds. We're all very different and yet have some commonalities, I guess. Many of us, I think most of us want to be happy, and we don't want to suffer illnesses, and most people want some kind of love in their life. But we do have different kinds of minds, and it's good to sit down and think, well, what kind of a mind do I have? That way, we can feed it. Michael said that the other day. I went to go off to hear Dr. Stephen Holler, who, by the way, has a great mind, went to another of his lectures, and he knows I need that. I love lectures. I love going, even if I'm never going to become a Gnostic practitioner. I really enjoy learning from brilliant minds from many traditions. I've gone to hear lectures of physicists and spiritual teachers. I have that really need for that, and certainly sometimes I can overwhelm myself. But for me, and then some people have a very set kind of focused mind where they're really focused on one kind of way of being. And some people have a mind that's probably more sensual in nature. Here, I think you can look at where Mercury is in your chart to understand your basic mind. But remember, it's the sun that will eventually need to be fed by that mind too. So you want to look at the relationship of Mercury to your sun sign. But look at it as I think it's a great time to be looking inwardly at the thought process itself, and not to be reactive, and not to just let your monkey mind take over and do what it wants to do, which of course mine still does, without repressing things, because I don't see that to be very helpful at all. So that's mainly some of the things I wanted to say. There was a really cool quote I had found, and it was Aleister Crowley, of course, another one of my favorite magicians. And one of the things I've noticed for this year, and maybe we can talk about it through the year, is that a lot of people are drawing the Empress card. Now, Michael and I do so many readings that every now and then there is an archetypal energy that enters everybody's cards, and you have to sort of start thinking, okay, why is everyone picking this card? I shuffled it, I used different decks, and it was also prevalent in Dr. Holler's prediction for the year. So one of the things that Crowley says about the Empress, which is beautiful, is the alchemical symbol of Venus, which is a circle over a cross, is the only one of the planetary symbols which comprises all the Sephiroth of the Tree of Life. He says, quote, "The doctrine implied is that the fundamental formula of the universe is love." So you can draw the circle on the top of the Sephirah with 1, 2, 4, 6, 5, and 3s. And then the cross is actually formed with 6, 9, 10, 7, and 8. And I'd never noticed that before. So I said, whoa. So that you can see how important the Empress figures in the tree, and maybe not the only important thing, but definitely plays a major role. So think about that, and the idea that maybe the Empress is trying to give us all a message this year in our own ways about our true desires. It's also a card of truth. And the planet Venus, by the way, is also about very specific timing. And I'll talk about that another time, but it's a very, the planet itself has this really precise timing associated with it. So I think there's something important about the time of this year. So I hope that helps you to think about thought itself, the Kabbalistic tree of life. If you would like to experience a reading with me or Michael and see how we use the Qabalah with the tarot, you can book readings with us on our website, www.mysticraven.net. And we are still working at the Mystic Journey bookstore, which will be moving. We'll talk about that another time, but locally moving. And I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this little segment. It's really becoming enjoyable for me. So until next week, I hope you have a good week, and I will see you then when we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together.